The second time I died, I was the one holding the door open. The first time, I did not see it coming. The first time, my twin sister Isabella stood at the top of the east stairwell in our family's estate, and I walked toward her with 2 glasses of champagne, and she said my name once, gently, the way she had said it when we were 6 and shared a bunk bed, and she would whisper across the dark to make sure I was still there. I looked up. I smiled. She put her hand flat against my sternum and pushed. I remember the marble. I remember the way the railing slid past my shoulder like a thing I had failed to catch. I remember thinking, with a clarity that did not feel like dying, that my husband was at the bottom of the stairs and he was not looking up. Then I was 32 and lying in the bed I had shared with Marcus Hale for 5 years, and the clock on the dresser said 6:47 on the morning of January 8th, and my body was whole. I lay very still. I counted the cracks in the ceiling. There were 4. There had always been 4. I knew, the way you know your own teeth with your tongue, that this was the morning of the Q1 partners' breakfast. I knew Marcus was in the shower because the pipes were singing the way they sang only on cold mornings. I knew that in 9 months and 6 days, my sister was going to put her hand on my chest and push. I knew what she had taken. I knew how she had taken it. I knew every face that had watched her take it and looked the other way. My hands went cold. The room got very quiet. Then I smiled, and the smile felt like a door opening on its own hinges, and I said, out loud to the empty ceiling, the only sentence I would need for the next year. Last time she took everything from me. This time, I am the one giving it away, and I am going to smile the whole time. Marcus came out of the bathroom in the navy towel I had bought him in Lisbon. He looked at me on the pillow and said, "Are you all right? You look strange." I said I had a bad dream. He kissed my forehead the way you kiss a child whose fever has broken. He said, "Isabella is going to be at the breakfast. Please be nice." I said, "I am always nice to my sister." He did not catch my voice. The first time, he never had. To understand what was taken, you have to understand what was built. I built Wren and Hale Capital. The name is in that order because my grandfather was Atticus Wren, who built the family money out of a single textile mill in the 1940s, and because my husband's surname was on the door for optical reasons that had been Adrian Vance's idea. Adrian was Isabella's husband, 8 years older than us, the kind of man who attended every wedding holding a flute of something expensive and quietly evaluating the room. Adrian had introduced me to Marcus at 25. Adrian had also, 6 months later, taken Marcus aside at a holiday lunch and said, "A woman's name on a fund door makes the institutional money hesitant. Put your name out front. She will not mind." Marcus told me this once, in bed, the way men tell you small thefts and call them compliments. I did not mind. I did not mind because the fund was mine in every way that mattered. I had built the quantitative model in my second year out of Wharton, refined it through 3 downturns, and personally walked it through 47 institutional placements. The flagship fund held $42 million at the start of the year I died. By the night I died, it held 78. The algorithm, I called it Atlas after my grandfather's middle name, sat on a server I had built in a converted closet off our home office, behind a password Marcus had never asked for because Marcus did not believe a fund could live inside a closet. The fund was mine. The name on the door was his. The husband was both of ours, in the way that things you have built together feel both of yours, until one of you decides otherwise. Isabella came home from London the spring before I died. She had been married to Adrian for 4 years and living in their flat in Belgravia, and she came back, she said, because Mother was lonely, and because Adrian's firm was opening a New York office, and because she missed the family. The first time around, I believed all three. The second time, I knew that Adrian's firm was hemorrhaging money, that Mother had not asked her to come, and that Isabella had spent 18 months in London learning that being the prettier twin in a city where no one had grown up watching us was not, in fact, a career. She moved into the guest suite at the family estate, which is to say my grandfather's house, which is to say the house that was supposed to be mine because my grandfather had told me on the porch of that house when I was 9 that the house and the trust attached to it were going to be mine because Isabella did not love it the way I did. My parents had quietly let Isabella borrow against the trust for the last 2 years of her London life. I did not know this the first time. I knew it the second. The first dinner she came to after returning, she took Marcus's elbow when he reached for the salt and said, "Oh, Marcus, you are exactly the way Olivia described." And Marcus laughed because he liked being described, and I watched my sister's thumb rest on the inside of his wrist for 1 second longer than a thumb rests by accident. The first time around, I did not see it. The second time, I let her keep her thumb there. I asked her, across the table, how she was settling in. I poured her more wine. I asked Marcus to take her by the office the following week and show her what we did, because Isabella, I said smiling, has always been so interested in numbers. Marcus said, "Has she?" Isabella said, "Of course I have." My mother said, "That is so kind of you, Olivia." And Adrian, who had flown in for the weekend, looked at me for a long moment over the rim of his glass. Adrian was the only one who looked at me, the second time. Adrian was going to be a problem. I needed 3 things before the awakening showed on my face. I needed Nathan Cole, I needed the audit window, I needed a reason for Isabella to want what I was going to give her. Nathan Cole was a forensic accountant at the firm that audited Wren and Hale's books once a quarter. I had met him exactly twice in my first life. Once at a Q1 review when he asked a question about counterparty exposure that no one else in the room had thought to ask. And once at a Q3 review when he asked the same question again because no one had answered him the first time. He was 36, quiet, wore the same charcoal suit to every meeting, and had a habit of writing notes in a small leather book with a mechanical pencil. He had asked me at the Q3 review whether I had built the model myself. I had said yes. He had nodded once and written something in the book and not looked at me again. He was the only person in that room, the first time, who had treated my answer as a fact and not a courtesy. In the second life, I called the audit firm the second week of January and asked, on a technicality, to have Nathan assigned as our primary on the next review. The technicality was that I had a small concern about a counterparty exposure I wanted handled discreetly. The audit firm was delighted. Marcus, when I told him, said, "Fine, whatever you want," and went back to his email. The audit window was the second piece. I rescheduled the Q1 review 2 weeks early, citing a board calendar conflict. Marcus did not look up. Isabella, who had by now begun coming to the office in soft sweaters and asking Marcus to explain things, asked what an audit was. Marcus laughed and said, "Do not worry about it." "Do not worry about it" became, in my second life, the 4 most useful words my husband had ever spoken. The third piece was the reason. The reason was simple. Isabella was going to want what I gave her, because she had always wanted what was mine, and because Adrian's firm was about to file for an internal restructuring that would leave him without a New York office, and because my sister had, since the age of 12, defined herself entirely by what she could lift out of my hands. I started with the small things. I gave her my favorite earrings, the ones our grandmother had left to me. I took them off at a family lunch and pressed them into Isabella's palm and said, "You have always loved these. I want you to have them." My mother teared up. Isabella performed surprise. Marcus said, "That is so generous of you." I said, "What is mine is hers." Isabella's mouth twitched at the corner, the way it twitches when she is trying not to smile. I gave her my place on the foundation board. I called the chair and said I was overcommitted, that my sister had been wanting to do more philanthropic work, that Isabella would be a wonderful addition. The chair, who had known me since I was 14, said, "Are you sure, Olivia?" I said, "I have never been more sure of anything." I gave her a key to our house. That one mattered. I gave her the key one evening when she was leaving after dinner, slipped it into her hand at the door, told her she should feel free to come over whenever, that Marcus and I were both so happy to have her back. She closed her fingers around it. She said, "Oh, Liv." She said it in the voice she had used when we were 6. Marcus, behind me, said, "That is a lovely thought." I said, "I want her to feel at home here." I said it looking at my husband, and my husband, who had no idea that the woman he had agreed to share a key with would, in 7 months, push the woman who gave it to her down a flight of stairs in front of him, said, "That is exactly the kind of thing I love about you." I closed the door behind her and I went into the bathroom and I sat on the closed lid of the toilet and I did not cry. I had cried in the first life. I was not going to spend the second life crying about the same people. Instead, I opened my phone and I sent Nathan Cole an email asking whether he would have time for a brief conversation about the structure of Atlas in advance of the Q1. He replied in 40 minutes. He said yes. He said his pencil was sharp. The first confrontation, the first time around, was the wound itself. The second time, the wound had already happened. So the first confrontation I built, this life, was different. It was the moment I let my sister believe she had already won. 3 weeks before the Q1, I invited Isabella to the home office. The home office was the room with the closet that held the server that held Atlas. I had never let her in the room. Marcus had been in it perhaps 6 times in 5 years, and only when he wanted something printed. Isabella had asked, in her soft new voice, whether she could see where the magic happened. I had said, "Of course, come on Tuesday." She came on Tuesday in cashmere. She walked the perimeter of the room with her hands behind her back, the way you walk a museum. She looked at the framed prospectus on the wall. She looked at the books. She did not look at the closet. I said, "Do you want to see it?" She said, "See what?" I said, "The model, the thing the fund is." I opened the closet. I showed her the server. I showed her on the screen above my desk the 4 lines of code that constituted the executable. I explained in the most patient voice I have ever used how Atlas worked. I told her about counterparty exposure and trailing volatility and the small adjustment my grandfather's notebook had given me when I was 23. I told her things only I had ever known. She listened. She asked one question. The question was, who else can run it? I said no one. I said that is the point. I said if anything happened to me, the fund would dissolve in 3 weeks because nobody else can read the file. Her face did something. I had been watching for it. The mask did not slip exactly. The mask was still on. But underneath the mask, something tilted, the way a glass tilts before it falls. She said, That is a lot of responsibility to carry alone, Liv. I said, It is. She said, You should teach Marcus. I said, Marcus does not want to learn. She said, Then teach me. I let the silence sit. I let her watch me consider it. I let her see, on my face, the exact expression of a woman being moved by her sister's kindness for the first time in their adult lives. I said, Would you really want that? She said, I want to help you, Liv. I have always wanted to help you. I said, Then yes, I will teach you. That night I went into the closet, and I made a copy of Atlas, and I changed 3 lines of code in the copy so the model would, run against live counterparty data, produce results that were plausible for 48 hours and catastrophic on the 49th. I labeled the corrupted copy Atlas 2. I labeled the real one with a name I will not write here because I am still using it. I taught my sister, over the next 4 weeks, the corrupted model. I taught it to her well. I taught it to her with the patience of a woman who loved her sister. I sat beside her at the desk and walked her through the variables. I let her ask questions. I praised her when she got things right. I corrected her, gently, when she got things wrong. I made her feel, for the first time in her life, that she was the smart one in the room. She glowed. Adrian came to dinner one Sunday in May and watched her describe, over the salad course, the principles of trailing volatility. He looked at her. He looked at me. He did not say anything. Adrian, I have said, was going to be a problem. The Q1 review with Nathan lasted 3 hours. I had requested a closed-door session, just him and me, on the technicality that there was a counterparty I needed to walk him through privately. Marcus, who was supposed to attend, was at a client lunch I had quietly suggested he could not miss. Isabella, who was not supposed to attend anything, was at a Pilates class I had paid for. Nathan sat across from me with his leather notebook. He uncapped the mechanical pencil. He said, "What are we actually doing here, Mrs. Hale?" I said, "Please call me Olivia." He said, "Olivia." I said, "I want to tell you a story, and at the end of the story, I am going to ask you a question. And I would like you to answer the question honestly, even though the honest answer is going to mean a great deal of work for you." He closed the notebook. He set the pencil down. He said, "Go ahead." I told him, not all of it, not the part where I had already died once. I told him that I believed, on the basis of specific signs I had been gathering for 6 months, that members of my immediate family were preparing to assume control of Wren and Hale Capital by means of an event that would either remove me from the firm or, less probably, remove me from my life. I told him I had documentary reasons to believe this. I told him I had begun building a record. I told him that the official model the firm was using was, as of 3 weeks ago, a model that I had personally corrupted in a way that would liquidate the fund's holdings into a controlled wind-down on a specific trigger date. I told him that I needed a third party, independent, credentialed, with standing, to witness the original model, the corrupted model, and the difference between them, and to hold a sealed copy of both against the day I needed it. I told him I had chosen him because, 2 years ago, he had asked me a question and treated my answer as a fact. Nathan was quiet for a long time. He looked at the framed prospectus on the wall. He looked at me. He said, "Olivia, if I am understanding you, you are asking me to be a witness to a fraud you are preparing against your own family." I said. I am asking you to be a witness to a fraud they are preparing against me. The corrupted model is the trap. I am not running it. They are. He said, and if they never take the bait, I said, then nothing happens. Atlas 2 never deploys. The real model continues to run the fund. No one is hurt. I look paranoid, and you bill us for an unusually thorough quarter, he said. And if they do take the bait, I said, then the difference between the two models is the evidence that they took it. He picked up the pencil. He opened the notebook. He wrote one line. He said, all right. I will need copies of both models, the timestamps on the corruption, and a deed of representation that names me as the firm's outside counsel of record for forensic matters as of today's date. I said, I have the deed in the top drawer. He looked at me for the first time the way I had wanted to be looked at for 10 years. He said, you have been thinking about this for a while. I said, longer than you know. The cold turn, the second confrontation, in the shape the genre requires, happened on a Tuesday in July. Marcus came home from the office at 7 and said, Liv, can we talk? I said, of course. He sat on the edge of the bed. He said, I've been thinking, with everything going on, and Isabella being so willing to help, maybe it would be a good time for me to be listed as primary on the fund, just for optics. The institutional money has been getting nervous about your travel schedule. The first time around, this conversation had happened in September, and I had cried. The second time, I closed my book. I said, that makes sense, Marcus. Let us file the paperwork on Monday. He blinked. He said, really? I said, really? He said, that is so... Liv, I love you. I said, I love you too. He kissed me on the forehead. He went to call Isabella. I knew he was calling Isabella because I had built the corrupted model on the assumption that he would. I heard him, through the closed door of the bathroom, say her name. I heard him laugh. I sat on the edge of the bed in the room where, in 3 months, I was supposed to die, and I felt nothing at all. In August, Isabella moved into the guest room of our house full-time, on the temporary basis of repairs being done at the estate. The repairs were real. I had commissioned them. I had asked the contractor to take his time. She came down to breakfast every morning in one of my robes. She drank from my mug. She referred to Marcus, in conversation with our mother on the phone, as we. We are thinking of going to Aspen. We are looking at a new car. I listened from the kitchen with my hand around a coffee cup, and I did not move. I gave her my parking spot at the office. I gave her my seat at the holiday gala planning committee. I gave her the small studio apartment my grandfather had left me on East 63rd, the one I had been keeping as a private workspace, the one I told her could be hers to use as a pied-à-terre. She wept when I gave it to her. She said, you do not have to do this, Liv. I said, I want to. She believed me because she wanted to. I gave her, in the first week of September, signing authority on the personal trust my grandfather had left me. I told her it was easier this way, with everything getting complicated, with the fund being restructured, with my schedule what it was. The trust held $8 million. The signing authority was conditional on her countersigning a small document, which I had drafted with Nathan, that listed the trust assets in a way I needed listed for reasons I did not explain. She signed without reading. She always had. The third confrontation, the public tremor, happened at my mother's birthday lunch on September 21st. I wore navy. I sat between my father and my Aunt Vivian. Isabella sat across from me, beside Marcus, who had begun in the last month to sit with her by default. Adrian was at the far end of the table, watching. My mother stood up to toast. She thanked everyone for coming. She thanked Isabella in particular for moving home and being such a comfort to her, and for stepping into the family business in a way that had been, frankly, a relief to all of them. She did not look at me when she said this. She looked at Isabella. I lifted my glass with everyone else. I said to Isabella, I said it brightly. I drank. Then I set my glass down and I said, while I have everyone, I wanted to mention that I have been thinking about my role at the firm, and I have decided, with Marcus's support, to step back from operations entirely after the December launch of our new fund. I am going to focus on family. A small silence. My mother calculating. My father, who had not really been listening, smiling generally. Marcus opening his mouth and closing it. Isabella very still. Adrian said, "What an interesting decision, Olivia." I said, "I think it is the right one." Adrian said, "Who will be running operations?" I said, "Oh, Isabella has been doing such a wonderful job learning the model. I think it makes sense for her to assume the operational seat. Marcus and I have already discussed it." We had not. Marcus's face went a particular color. He said, "Of course, yes, we have been discussing." Isabella said, "Olivia, are you sure?" I said, "I have never been more sure of anything." Adrian held my eye across the table for the length of a sentence I did not say. He set down his glass. The lunch ended 40 minutes later. As we walked to the cars, Adrian fell into step beside me. He said quietly, "Are you all right?" I said, "I am fine, Adrian." He said, "Olivia, listen. I have known your sister longer than anyone in that room. I do not think you understand what she is." I said, "I understand exactly what she is. I have understood since I was 12. He stopped walking. He said, "Then what are you doing?" I said, "I am giving her what she has always wanted. I am doing it on purpose. I am asking you, as the only person in that house who has ever looked at me when I spoke, to stay out of my way." He looked at me for a long time. He said, "What is the trap, Olivia?" I said, "The trap is that she is going to take it." He did not say anything else. He got in his car. He drove away. 2 weeks later, he filed for separation from Isabella, citing irreconcilable differences, and moved the New York office of his firm to Charlotte. The first time around, he had stayed in the house through October and watched Isabella push me down the stairs and said nothing. The second time, I let him go. October came. The first time around, October 14th had been a Saturday, and the family had come to the estate for what was supposed to be a small dinner celebrating Marcus's promotion to chairman. The first time around, I had been pregnant and had not yet told anyone. The first time around, I had walked up the east stairwell carrying 2 glasses of champagne for the toast. The second time, I did not get pregnant. I had not slept with Marcus since June. He had not noticed. The second time, I took my sister to the estate on the morning of October 14th, alone, and I gave her one more thing. I gave her the house. We sat on the porch where our grandfather had once told me, when I was 9, that the estate would be mine. I had brought tea. I had brought the deed. I told her that I had decided, in light of everything, that the estate should be in her name, that she loved entertaining more than I did, that Marcus and I would be selling the city house anyway, that we were thinking of moving abroad, that the estate would be wasted on me. I told her our parents had agreed. They had not. I had not asked them. She wept. She said, "Liv, I do not deserve this." I said, "You do." I handed her the deed. I had drafted it with Nathan. She did not read it. She signed where I pointed. The deed transferred the house. It also, in language buried on the 3rd page, in a paragraph that began with the words, "and for the avoidance of doubt," acknowledged that the signatory accepted personal responsibility for all encumbrances, debts, and outstanding obligations associated with the property, including, but not limited to, outstanding draws on the Atticus Wren Family Trust. The trust she had been borrowing against for 2 years. The trust she had 3 weeks earlier become the signing authority for. The trust into which I had, with Nathan's help, transferred the entirety of the corrupted Atlas II model's seed capital on the basis that the trust was now the official operating vehicle for the fund's new model under Isabella's signature. The corrupted model that was scheduled to deploy on October 17th. Isabella signed the deed. She kissed my cheek. She said, "I love you, Liv." I said, "I love you too." I left her on the porch. I drove back to the city. I did not go up the east stairwell that night. I did not drink champagne. I sat on the floor of my home office with the door locked, and I watched, on the screen, the slow, indifferent ticking of the fund's live data, and I waited. On October 17th, at 4:12 in the afternoon, Atlas II deployed. The fund did not collapse all at once. That was the point. The fund executed, in the language of the corrupted model, a sequence of controlled hedge unwinds that liquidated $31 million of position into cash on the back of a counterparty exposure that did not exist. The cash routed, by the design of the model, into a holding account whose signing authority belonged exclusively to the named operational officer of the fund. The named operational officer of the fund, as of September 21st, was Isabella Wren. By 6 p.m., the fund's seed investors had been notified. By 7, the board had been called. By 9, 3 regulators had been informed. By midnight, Nathan Cole had delivered to the firm's general counsel a sealed envelope containing the original atlas, the corrupted Atlas II, the timestamps on every modification, the deed of representation he had signed in April, and a notarized affidavit describing the entirety of the conversation we had had in the closed-door Q1 review. The 4th confrontation, the trap sprung, happened in my own kitchen at 1:30 in the morning. Marcus came in white. He had his phone in his hand. He said, Olivia, something has happened to the fund." I said, "I know." He said, "You know?" I said, "Sit down, Marcus." He sat. I put a glass of water in front of him. I said, "The fund deployed a corrupted model this afternoon. $31 million in seed capital has been routed into a holding account in your sister's name. The corruption is traceable to a copy of the model that I made in April and taught her to use over the spring. There is a forensic record of every step. The auditor has the file. The board has been notified. The regulators have been notified." He said, "What have you done?" I said, "I have done nothing, Marcus. Isabella ran the model. Isabella signed the documents. Isabella is the named officer." He said, "You cannot do this." I said, "I have not done this. I have only watched her do it." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because in another life, You let her push me down the stairs of my grandfather's house, and you did not look up. Because I built that fund, and you let your firm be named after you. Because I asked you in June what you wanted, and you said you wanted to feel like the smart one, and I gave you what you asked for. Because every gift in this house for the last 9 months has been a door, and you have all walked through every one. He said, "That is insane." I said, "Then prove it." He did not move. The phone in his hand buzzed. He did not look at it. I said, "Marcus, you should go. Isabella will need a lawyer. So will you. So will my parents, who countersigned the deed transferring the estate to Isabella without knowing that the deed also transferred to her the operating liability for the trust. So will Adrian's firm, except Adrian filed his separation in time and is in Charlotte. You should call him in the morning. He is, as it turns out, the only one of you with any sense." Marcus said, "Olivia, please." I said, "Please is not a sentence I have heard from any of you in 9 months. It is interesting to hear it now." He left. He did not slam the door. He did not have the energy to slam the door. I cleaned the kitchen. I rinsed the glass. I went upstairs and slept, for the first time in 9 months, without my phone on the pillow. The public reckoning was the Wren Family Foundation's annual gala on December 12th at the Plaza. I should not have been there. The press release 2 weeks earlier had implied I had resigned in disgrace following an internal matter. The press release had been issued by Isabella, who, in those 2 weeks, had not yet realized that the internal matter was named after her. The board had not yet moved against her because the board had not yet finished reading what Nathan had sent them. Isabella, who had been operating in public for 9 months on the assumption that she was the new face of the firm, had decided that the gala would be her debut. The gala was every name we had grown up around: 3 former senators, 2 of my grandfather's surviving partners, the chairman of the foundation, who had known me since I was 14, Aunt Vivian, my mother, my father, Marcus. Isabella, in white, the way she had worn white to her own wedding, the way I had warned her not to wear white the first time and let her wear it the second. I arrived at 8. I wore black. I had not RSVP'd. The maitre d' at the door said, "Mrs. Hale, we were not expecting you." I said, "I am still on the board, Daniel." I walked past him. The room went quiet in pieces. The closest tables first, then the middle of the room, then the head table, where my mother was already standing to make a toast, saw me and stopped. Isabella beside my mother smiled. The mask was on. She said, "Liv." She said it the way she had said it on the stairwell in the other life. She said, "What a wonderful surprise." I walked to the front of the room. I took the microphone from the foundation chair, who handed it to me without resistance, because he had known me since I was 14, and because he had, 3 days earlier, received from Nathan Cole a forensic accounting report he had not yet shown anyone else in the room. I tapped the microphone. I said, "Good evening." I said, "I want to thank my sister, who has been doing such a wonderful job at the firm this fall, for organizing tonight." I said, "I want to thank my husband for the support he has shown my sister during a period in which it has, as several of you have remarked, appeared that she is the one running the family business." I said, "I want to thank my mother and father for their willingness in September to publicly endorse Isabella's leadership at the firm." I said, in particular, "I want to thank Isabella for her willingness to sign every document I have placed in front of her for the last 9 months without reading any of them." Isabella's smile did not change. Her hand on the table did. I said, on October 17th at 4:12 in the afternoon, the operational model of Wren and Hale Capital deployed a sequence of liquidations that resulted in $31 million of fund capital routing into a holding account in my sister's name. The model that deployed was not the model the fund had operated on for the prior 6 years. The model that deployed was a copy I created in April, knowingly corrupted, and taught my sister, over a period of 4 weeks, to operate as if it were the original. My sister, who was named operational officer of the firm on September 21st, ran the corrupted model on the date in question. She did so under signing authority she had requested and received. The forensic record of the corruption, the instruction, the deployment, and the receipt of funds has been independently verified by Mr. Nathan Cole of Heron and Greaves, and has been in the possession of the Foundation's chair, the firm's general counsel, and the relevant regulatory bodies since November 4th. I said, the fund's capital has been recovered. The investors have been made whole. The model that actually operates the fund, the model my sister did not know existed, has continued to perform throughout the period in question. I said, I am telling you all of this tonight because I do not want any of you to be surprised tomorrow morning when the indictment is unsealed. The room did not gasp. The room did something worse. The room went quiet, the way a room goes quiet when it realizes it has, for a long time, been complicit. I watched it land in 3 faces. Aunt Vivian at table 2, who had spent 6 months telling me to be patient with my sister, who had drafted a toast for tonight that praised Isabella's leadership, brought one hand flat to the base of her throat, and did not move it for the rest of the speech. Her wineglass tilted in her other hand. She did not notice the wine spilling onto the cloth. The former Senator Eleanor Hargrove at table 3, whom Isabella had been cultivating for a board seat since August, set down her fork in the middle of a piece of salmon and turned her chair, very deliberately, so that her shoulder was to my sister and her face was to me. It was a small movement. Everyone at her table saw it. The foundation chair, James Ashford, who had known me since I was 14, who had been holding the forensic report in his desk drawer for 2 weeks, waiting for me to tell him what to do with it, took a single step backward from Isabella. The way you step back from something you have just learned is hot. Marcus, at the head table, did not move at all. His face went gray in stages, first around the mouth, then up to his eyes. The way a man goes gray when he understands that the woman he chose has just been described, in front of 3 former senators and the foundation chair, as the operational officer of a fraud he attached his name to and signed off on. Isabella stood up. She said, Olivia, this is not... Liv, you cannot do this to me. The mask came down. I watched it. So did everyone else. The white dress, the careful smile she had spent 18 months perfecting in London, the voice she had been using since April, all of it slid off her face at the same time, the way a costume slides off a hanger. Underneath was the 12-year-old who had once cut the head off my favorite doll because the doll was mine and she had been told it was mine, and that was, even then, intolerable to her. I had not seen that face in 20 years. The senator at table 3 saw it. The foundation chair saw it. My mother saw it and made a sound nobody at the table would later be able to describe. She said, I did everything you told me. I ran what you taught me. You told me it was the model. I said, I know. She said, then how is this my fault? I said, because you took it. She said, you gave it to me. I said, I know. She said, Liv, please, please, Liv, I am your sister. I am your only sister, please. I said, please is not a sentence I have heard from you in 18 years. It is interesting to hear it now. She lunged across the table. 2 waiters caught her. The room by now was on its feet. Marcus had not moved. My mother had begun to cry, though whether she was crying for Isabella or for herself was not yet clear, and would not be clear, I suspected, for some time. I set the microphone down on the lectern. I walked to my mother. I said, I love you. I said, you should have asked me, in April, why I gave her my earrings. I walked to my father. I said, you should have called me in September before you signed anything. I walked to Marcus. I did not say anything to Marcus. I looked at him until he looked away. I walked out of the room. Nathan was waiting in the lobby. He had a coat over his arm. He had the leather notebook in his hand. He had not been at the gala. He had been, he said, downstairs at the bar, because he did not want to be present for anything he might later have to testify about. He had heard the room go quiet through the door. He said, Are you all right? I said, I am fine, Nathan. He said, Do you want a drink? I said, I would like a drink very much. We walked out into the snow. The plaza behind us was already starting to leak out into the street. Men on phones, women crying into furs, the press of a city absorbing a story before the story was even printed. I did not look back. Isabella was charged on December 15th with securities fraud, wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. She was, as of the morning of the indictment, the sole operational officer of record at Wren and Hale Capital, the sole signing authority on the holding account, and the sole signatory on the deed transferring the family estate into her name on a basis of personal liability for the trust she had been borrowing against. She was not granted bail. The trust, frozen as part of the proceedings, was administered under the terms of my grandfather's will by the next surviving beneficiary, who was me. Marcus was named in the unsealing as a person of interest. He was not charged criminally. He was, however, named in the civil suit the foundation filed 2 weeks later, the one that sought the recovery of his named compensation as chairman of the firm during a period in which the actual operating officer was, on his stated authority, his sister-in-law. His firm of record dissolved its representation of him in January. His law firm referred him to a smaller firm in February. The smaller firm was in Charlotte. My mother did not speak to me for 6 months. In June, she sent a letter. The letter said she was sorry. The letter did not ask me to forgive her. I respected that. I wrote back. I did not forgive her. I told her I loved her. I told her I had not yet decided what that meant. Aunt Vivian called me the morning after the gala and apologized for every dinner at which she had asked Isabella how the firm was doing without asking me. I told her she did not need to apologize. She insisted. We had lunch the following week. We have had lunch every week since. The chairman of the foundation, who had known me since I was 14, asked me in January to take the chair. I said yes. Adrian in Charlotte sent me one email. The email said, "You were the only one in that house who saw what she was." The email said, "I am sorry I left you in it as long as I did." I wrote back. I said, You did not leave me in it. I let myself out. The estate, which had been deeded to Isabella, which had been forfeited to the receiver in the proceedings, was sold at auction in March. I bought it back through a holding company. I did not move in. I had not lived in it since I was 19, and I did not intend to start. I leased the main house to the foundation for a token rent. The east stairwell, where Isabella had pushed me down in another life, was, by the end of summer, the site of the foundation's annual scholarship dinner. The first dinner was attended by 42 young women on full scholarships in quantitative finance, all of them named, in part, after the man I had named Atlas after. I sat at the back. I did not give a speech. The new life is not a city. The new life is a building. I bought the studio apartment on East 63rd back from the trust, which is to say, I bought it from myself. I had given it to Isabella in September, the first time around as well. The first time she had used it to meet Marcus during the months we were married. The second time, she had used it for the same purpose, on the assumption that I did not know. I knew. I had a key. I had never gone. After the trial, I gutted it. I had the floors refinished. I had the kitchen rebuilt. I painted every wall the soft white my grandmother had liked. I moved in alone in April. The building is on a quiet block. The doorman, an older man named Felix, knows me by name from the first week. The bakery on the corner makes a brown butter cardamom pastry on Saturdays. The dog on the third floor, a small, unimpressive terrier named Henry, has decided I am his personal responsibility. He waits at the elevator on the days I work from home. I have never owned a dog. I had not understood, in the first life, that you do not need to own a dog for one to belong to you. Nathan is in the apartment now more often than not. We did not start until April. He waited. He waited until the proceedings were unsealed, until his testimony was on the record, until he could no longer be accused of any conflict, until I had had a winter of my own. The first time he stayed for dinner, he brought a bottle of wine he had picked specifically because I had mentioned, once, 6 months earlier, that I liked the kind of red that tastes like the inside of an old library. He remembered. He had remembered for 6 months. He asks before he assumes. He intercepts the small stressors before they reach me. He notices when my hands go cold. He puts a cup of tea in my hand without commentary. He reads at night beside me with a small mechanical pencil, marking up reports. He is, in the bones of him, a quiet man, and I have learned in the last year that quiet is not the same as absent, which is something Marcus, who was loud, never understood. He has not asked me to marry him. I have not asked him either. We have time. Marcus is in Charlotte. I know this because Aunt Vivian, who keeps track of these things on my behalf without my asking, mentioned at lunch in October that he had taken a job at a regional advisory firm and was, by all reports, having a difficult time. I did not ask for more. Vivian, who understands me, did not give more. I do not look him up. I do not need to. The man I built a fund for has been deleted from the masthead of the fund I built, and the masthead now reads, in my grandfather's name, Wren Capital. That is the only line of him I needed to read. Isabella took a plea in May. 8 years. Federal facility upstate. I have not visited. She has written me 3 letters. The first asked me to forgive her. The second asked me to send her money for the commissary. The third asked me what I had been thinking. I read all 3. I did not reply. The third one I kept, because the third one was the only one in which she had finally asked the right question. And the asking of the right question is, in my experience, the beginning of a person becoming someone you might one day be willing to know. She is not there yet. I am not in a hurry. My mother and I have dinner once a month. We do not talk about Isabella. We talk about the foundation, the garden at the estate, the recipe for the lemon cake my grandmother used to make. My father plays golf. He does not know what to say to me. He tries. I let him try. That is, I have decided, the most I can offer him, and it is more than he offered me for 30 years. I sit, on Sunday mornings, at the small table by the window in the apartment on East 63rd. Nathan reads the paper. Henry, the terrier, sleeps in a square of sun on the rug. The coffee is good. The apartment is quiet. I am 33 years old, and I am alive in a life I built twice. The first time, I built it for the people who wanted to take it. The second time, I built it for myself, and I built the door, and I held the door open, and I let them walk through. I closed it behind them. I am still smiling.